Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to our third episode in this three-part mini-series about how to use the replay mod. As you can see, this isn't actually me speaking to camera. I am back here in the second of the two replay mod recordings I took the other day, building up this little medieval street scene here with two houses on either side. Obviously, there's only one from the first time-lapse right now, but as the scene goes on here, you'll see I start to build up a medieval kind of road, just a kind of nice dirt path with a little bit of mossy cobblestone here and there going through the city. And then on this side, on the right-hand side, I start to build up another medieval house quite similar to the first. And so I thought in today's video I would take you over some useful tips and tricks about how to use the replay mod. Just some stuff that I have found over my years of using this mod really help make the experience a little bit easier. And one of the first things I want to cover really is how to work with the camera a little bit more effectively, because you'll find that the camera in the replay mod has a tendency to smooth out transitions between these position keyframes, which is a good thing for us because it means it can kind of make the camera moves a little bit less jerky, a little bit more smooth, but unfortunately, it does occasionally mean that the path smooths out to the extent where you are clipping through certain blocks, and that can potentially introduce some weird glitchy looking visuals into your time lapses. So that's the kind of thing I want to take us over avoiding if I can. Now, as you can see, I've created a few position keyframes on this timeline already, so the camera follows this path around here like so. And for the camera that we're looking at here, that's currently not presenting a problem. Let's play that back and see if we end up clipping through the roof here, because I have a feeling we might just dip down a little bit too low. Oh, looks like we just skimmed the top there. Okay, well, let's imagine that maybe I want to come over the top of this roof and then down the other side here. So I'm actually positioning myself in front of this doorway. I'm going to delete that position keyframe and put that there. That will probably put the camera path going more or less straight through that section of the roof. Once again, let's play it back. The line itself there is going right over the top of the roof, but I have a feeling that when we play this back, you might see us grazing through a couple of the blocks here. Yep, looks like I'm headed for that stone brick. There you go. And already there's a little bit of glitchiness happening because the camera is kind of in a pseudo spectator mode state, so you can clip through blocks. Obstacles don't matter to the camera, you can just go through it. And sometimes, of course, that leads to you being able to see through some faces of blocks but not others because of the way Minecraft renders them, and as such, a camera path that can look like you're going over the top of a roof like that can lead to you clipping through it and seeing through a bunch of blocks, and the whole thing doesn't look all that great. I have actually left that in a couple of my time lapses in the past just because I didn't want to go through the trouble of re-rendering a few sequences, but usually it's best to try and avoid stuff like that. And so the way I recommend getting around that is, for a start, making sure you play back your camera timeline here, your kind of camera path footage frequently, so that you can test it before you render it, because you're saving yourself a lot of trouble, a lot of waiting around further down the line. But also, once you identify something like that, it's not such a bad idea to create another position keyframe, maybe up here. Placing a position keyframe at this point on the timeline, maybe a little bit above it, will curve the camera up and over that section of the roof. And while the camera path line here might look a little bit dramatic, it's actually not going to be too bad. Primarily, of course, because we have the field of view moved in, so the camera's field of view is going to be a little bit tighter than it looks here. Let's play that back and let's see how that has affected the view of this roof. Let's see if we make a quick curve up and over. I mean, it speeds up the camera a little bit, so you might want to space out those movement paths a little bit. Let's say we just move these around. You can click and drag the position keyframes around just to space those out a little bit more so it's moving at the same pace. If you have position keyframes spaced evenly along the timeline here, it will probably move a little bit more smoothly than if they are closer together and the camera is moving from one position to another very fast. So let's play that back now. Crazy grass noise happens, and yep, we're up and over. That all looks like roughly the same speed, and then it just neatly comes to rest at the end there. Okay, that's looking a lot better. So that's one example of how you can avoid clipping through blocks in your replay footage, just to make it look like you're still able to interact with the rest of the scene as though it's a solid object. Kind of adds to the realism, because naturally a camera operator in the real world wouldn't be able to just phase through a wall in order to get a look at things. Of course, there are some places in which phasing through an object probably wouldn't be such a bad thing, particularly if you want to use windows for certain effects. I feel like transparent blocks or open doors or something like that are going to be okay to just walk through with the camera. And so what I figure we can do is set up a keyframe there and then have that come out, maybe move the scene along a little bit in terms of time. So as we come through the window, you see me building up the entrance to this house opposite. Let's pause it there. There we go. We can just make a straight camera move through the window like so. Let's check that that looks okay. We'll see. I'm not sure if I'm going to be phasing through the window or not. The height of the camera is not quite being represented as accurately here because we have the FOV, you know, pushed in a little bit. And let's make another quick move over to here. And that should curve around from the position where we exit the house via that window. Let's set a time keyframe there, and let's play that back and see if it works out okay. It looks like we're going through the window. Yep, there we go. So the camera path cannot always be trusted in terms of displaying exactly where the camera is moving, but just playing it back in that trial and error process is a really good way of getting the camera moves that you want. Of course, I'm able to do all of this with shaders and stuff on because I have a pretty decent PC, but of course, if you want to make sure that your computer can keep up, you can always disable the shaders until later because it will still be able to perform all of the same stuff without the shaders enabled. Let's scroll that back there, and there we go. We're going through the window. It looks exactly the same. It's just that some kind of post-production in terms of the shaders has been added to the scene if we want to add those in later. So if you find that the camera lags behind a little bit and can't quite keep up, and by the time it's loaded some of the scene in, then the footage is already finished, that's probably a sign that you need to disable some of your graphics options, disable some of the fancier stuff, allow your computer a little bit more time to catch up before you move on with the scene. And remember, you can set up all the camera moves and stuff like that beforehand, and then add the shaders in at the last minute before you render the scene, and the whole thing is going to look pretty with shaders once it comes out the other side of the rendering process. So in that respect, you should be fine. While we're talking about camera moves, let's capture a slightly different camera move here where we're actually going to tilt the camera to one side, maybe as we come off the roof section here, as though the camera is on a kind of roller coaster track that rolls down here into the street and maybe zooms in on the player from there. So we're going to start up here and we're going to open up the advanced options here where you'll see that there are some camera tilt options for rolling clockwise, counterclockwise, and resetting the camera tilt. So we're going to be using a couple of those. I'm going to be rolling clockwise for this one using the L key, but you can do the same with J, and K is going to reset it. So let's start with our position and time keyframes here. We're going to have the scene move along a little bit, but the player is still down there working on the wall, so that's fine. I want to move over here and I want to roll clockwise like that. It's going to look quite exaggerated right now, but you're going to be able to catch up with that in a second when the camera moves along. Let's make that sort of the first 4 seconds of this. Add a position keyframe there. And then we're going to have a little bit of a difficult time controlling it because the camera position is still relative to like your horizontal position in the scene. So you are going to find that, say, if you rolled completely upside down, sorry if this is getting a bit disorienting for you right now, you'll find that your view is inverted. So now if I move the mouse down, it's actually tilting me towards the ground as though I was looking down. It's a little bit weird to control. So we don't want to go the whole hog there. We do want to just make sure that we roll off this roof, and then if I hold shift, I'm actually moving downwards towards the ground in the scene, as though gravity is kind of remaining the same. Let's make that another 4 seconds like so, and then maybe we will come back to the center of the street, zoom in a little bit on the player, and we'll reset the camera tilt to even out the shot a little bit, and then we'll make that the last 4 seconds there. So let's add another time keyframe, and let's see how that goes. There we go, we're just rolling gently off the side of the building here. It feels a little bit disorienting, like we're falling off the roof somehow. But then the scene can roll smoothly down, and this would be really good for making a slow motion video of somebody on a roller coaster. You could actually have the camera tilt with them so that the minecart track looks like it's going on a straight line, but everything else about the scenery is tilted at 45 degrees or something like that. I think that'd make a really cool scene. So that right there is how you control camera tilt, and I don't use this feature all that often. You'll notice I don't do a lot of like rolling around in my time-lapse footage. You could even set like a Dutch angle and have a really interesting kind of sideways sideways time-lapse like this, where the player is just building stuff in the foreground and everything seems to be up a slope kind of thing. But yeah, I don't tend to do that all that much when I do time-lapses because I don't focus too heavily on the cinematic things. The build is kind of the key thing about the scene. I don't want to disorient people too much by having the camera roll around all crazy. But it's good to know that the option is there. While we're looking at the perspective that you're viewing a build from, it could also be interesting to give a first-person view of a build in progress through the replay mod and be able to re-render it with some visual effects like shaders and stuff like that. And so to do that, you can open up the player overview menu, which I just opened up without really explaining what I was doing. If you press B on the keyboard or click on player overview here, you will find this menu appears, and as before, I can show you that I can toggle the player character in the scene on and off using the visible button here, but also by left-clicking on the player over here, I can actually get into the player's point of view, and you'll notice the keyframe here has changed to a blue keyframe, which is going to be from the spectator's perspective. So if I add some spectator and time keyframes to the timeline here, I let this move on, it's basically showing you all of the stuff that I've done while I was building the scene, but without all of the GUIs, the hotbar, the creative menu inventory, my hand being visible, that kind of stuff. You don't see any of that. All you see is kind of what you might see in real life, I suppose, like a person moving around a scene in first-person view. I didn't pick a particularly great example, so there we go. I'm going to speed the scene on a little bit until I get to a point where I've started building, and I find that if you're doing stuff in first person, especially in the replay mod, you probably want to zoom this out so the field of view is a little bit closer to what you're playing with naturally. Otherwise, things can look a little bit unnatural because your eyes don't focus in with that kind of tighter field of view. You tend to be able to see quite a lot around you in first person, so zooming it in can make people feel a little bit motion sick or nauseous. I also recommend sticking to slower speeds. Like real-time speed is probably a good idea for first-person view because once stuff speeds up, it starts to become a little bit incoherent because naturally I jerk the camera around a whole lot. You might be different, especially if you're somebody who plays without view bobbing or you have a much more precise idea of what you want out of a scene, but right now this all looks completely disorienting, and that kind of speed only really makes sense if you're looking at something from a first-person view and the camera can be more static. It's a fault of mine that I move the camera around a little bit too much when I play anyway. I'm constantly looking around me, looking at the scene and figuring out what details I can change or add, and unfortunately that doesn't translate particularly well when that's all happening at 8 times the normal speed. So I recommend slowing that down to something approaching real-time speed. Maybe go double speed if you feel like you absolutely have to set up the scene that way, because that might be a little more bearable for people to watch. You're not going to be jerking the camera around all over the place at that point, but still, I recommend sticking to real-time if you can. Now we have just moved the scene on by quite some distance because I had the 8 times speed going for a while, and so I'm not sure exactly where I am on the timeline anymore, and if I wanted to have a scene in real time, I didn't really take note of where I started, so it might be difficult for me to manually place another time and spectator keyframe in here to make sure that I had the footage happening in real time. This is where a really useful feature comes in, and that is pressing the V key on your keyboard or clicking Synchronize Timeline, and it will move the cursor on the keyframe timeline that far away. So in real time, we just spent 2 minutes and 8 seconds doing stuff in the scene, and we can add our time keyframe there, and this blue line appears to show that we are in spectator mode for this one. If I came out of spectator mode and tried to set more keyframes, you can actually pop yourself out there, and this blue line there will just show you exactly how long you were in spectator mode. So let's move back on the timeline here. We're doing some stuff in real time. There we go. We're popping down a few stair blocks here to make the staircase on the side of the house. This is going to last for another 10 seconds or so, and then once we come out of spectator mode, the camera will leave the player's head and it'll pop out and you'll get a little bit of a wider view of the scene. And obviously we haven't moved the timeline on very far at all from that point, so it's just completely slowed everything down, but as you can see, this has now drawn a crazy camera path in the air because that is where all of the spectator stuff was happening, and that's how much I move my head around. I should really try and stay more still when I build this stuff, but I was kind of freestyling all of this. I didn't really know what I was doing, so yeah, that's just how I build, unfortunately. Anyway, I've deleted a few of those keyframes. We've gone back into spectator view, and I want to show you something else about synchronizing our timeline, because right now, that's at real-time speed. That's at 2 minutes and 8 seconds. If I move the speed slider, so it's at 2 times speed, and I press V again to synchronize the timeline, it's actually going to move the cursor halfway along, because that's going to be twice the speed. Everything happens at twice the speed. Likewise, if we move this to 4 times speed, or, you know, whichever speed marker we want, we can press V to synchronize the timeline, and by placing our keyframes here, we will know that we're getting exactly 3 times speed when we play back the footage. So if we play that back, I mean, I'm not going to be able to tell just looking at it that this is at 3 times speed, but it certainly feels a fair bit faster. And so Replay Mod is able to calculate that stuff mathematically for you, and it's made all the same camera moves in all the same places, just at 3 times the speed. So, synchronizing your timeline can make things a lot easier, especially if you want to drop back down to 1 times speed, and it will allow you to calculate how long has passed since that time. Naturally, this is limited by the fact that the fastest it can go up to is 8 times speed, so anything more than that, and you're probably going to have to use a little bit more maths to work out exactly how fast you're going. I'm going to dip down into the other house here and actually take shaders back off again so I can show you a couple of other options from the advanced settings down here. If we take off the shaders and you take a look inside the house, you'll notice it's relatively dim in here right now. We have a little bit of natural light coming in from the windows, and of course that hole in the roof that I apparently didn't fill. No worries. If you press the Z key, or if you pause and go to toggle lighting from the advanced options down here, you can actually effectively give yourself night vision in the scene. You'll notice the night vision symbol comes up there in the bottom right hand corner, and that effectively allows you to just see better indoors. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and you can enable that underwater and stuff as well to give yourself slightly better vision for scenes in the vanilla look of the game without shaders added. With shaders, it doesn't really apply all that much because a lot of the stuff that goes into shaders overwrites the natural lighting engine of Minecraft, so you don't need to worry too much about that if you're using shaders for your time-lapse. But if your interior scenes are looking a little dark, you might want to consider toggling the lighting on and off to give yourself a little bit more flexibility with interior scenes. Speaking of hotkeys, another really useful thing to know about the Replay mod is that you can still take a screenshot with F2 if you want to, but it will bring up a screenshot rendering menu here where you can choose where the output file is saved, what the name of it is. You can choose whether or not you're rendering name tags, and you can even chroma key out a certain color if you want to create a green screen thumbnail of the picture. You can obviously choose the resolution here as well, so if you want to output a smaller or larger screenshot, you can do that too. You also have a few different rendering options here, such as being able to render a 360-degree panorama. I've not really experimented with this as far as screenshots go, but it might be worth a try. See if you can make some panoramic screenshots with that. And personally, I don't tend to use those settings all that much because I tend to take my screenshots in-game, but of course you might not have access to spectator mode if you're building on a server, but if you've taken a video using the Replay mod, you can fly around at your leisure and take screenshots of things from higher angles if you want to, so it might even be necessary for you to use the Replay mod to get exactly the screenshot you want for a YouTube video thumbnail or just a screenshot that shows off the build. The last couple of things I'm going to show you are really good for organization and when you want to render a whole bunch of stuff in a batch, because Replay mod will actually let you queue up a bunch of different stuff to render so you can work out all of your camera moves and do a bunch of different sequences and then render them all kind of at the end of the project, so you're not having to do some camera moves, then render that, and then come back and do some different camera moves and render that. It just makes the whole process a little bit more streamlined. The first thing we're going to look at is keyframe presets, which effectively allows you to store a sequence of keyframes, save it, and then come back to it later. I've set up a camera move here. I'll just play this from the beginning where we kind of come over here so you can see me building the street from the top. Once we get to about here, the camera starts to come down as I start to build the house, and then the camera continues along the side here at street level, so you can kind of see the door of the house from the side and so forth. And then once it sweeps around, we start to build this section here with the staircase coming down, and it's an overall view of the build that I quite like, and I wanted to keep that for later so that I didn't accidentally delete this sequence and end up having to redo the whole thing again. So what I've done there is I've saved it as a keyframe preset. Now the presets phrasing is a little bit weird. It kind of imagines that you can load these presets into other scenes as well. Think of them as saved camera paths, if that helps, because yeah, presets is a little bit of a misnomer. But anyway, if we click that to open this, you'll notice I have a keyframe repository window here where there could potentially be a whole bunch of different keyframe sequences stored here. I can click save as down here and we can save the current set of keyframes. The time keyframes and position keyframes all get saved. We're going to name this sequence 2 just for effect, even though I've already made a sequence 1, and then we can clear these keyframes out. We can set up a completely different set of camera moves, like say we've got camera starts here and then we move it around, we move the scene on maybe another 10 maybe 5 minutes. We've moved the timeline along here another 10 seconds. Let's move another 5 minutes there, and that's the roof done. So we'll swing around the roof like so, catch a little bit of the back of this house being built, and make another time and position keyframe there. Now we can open our keyframe presets, click on this sequence, and overwrite this one if we want to. So we can overwrite that sequence with the stuff that we've just shot, and if we end up clearing that, we can load up either of these sequences now. So if I load sequence 2, it will load the original camera move I had, and then if I load sequence 1, it will load up the camera moves that I just made. So you can save camera paths like that really easily, make a bunch of different shots, and then you can go to render them a little bit later. It's also really useful to do stuff like that if you experience crashes with the replay mod, and recent versions have been a lot more stable, but in the past I used the keyframe presets a whole bunch to make sure I didn't lose my work partway through, because I would often set up quite complex one-shot camera moves and then find myself crashing the program, and then all of my work would be lost and I'd have to go back in and spend another 10 to 15 minutes setting up the shot again. So it's kind of useful to use keyframe presets in that respect. They get saved with the replay, so even if you exit and then you return to that replay, let's open up Medieval House 2, not only does it cache your most recent set of keyframes here, you can also load up the keyframe presets, and both sequences are here for us to use, so we can load that one up, and we've got our camera move that works through the street again. Of course, the other time this comes in really useful is if you want to render a bunch of these shots as a batch, so you're doing multiple renders at once. Multiple scenes can be rendered all at the end of the process when you're done and you're ready to get the footage and move it into whatever editing program you want, or just upload it to YouTube if you feel like uploading it straight from there. So if we go to render camera path, you'll notice down here next to the render button it has one that says open queue, and we can add the current configuration, call this for example scene 1, add that, and that's now added to the render queue, so we can render each of these individually later. Now let's go in here, let's hit X to open up the keyframe repository, let's load up sequence 1, which was the different one that we had moving around the top of this roof as we were building it later. Yep, perfect. Okay, let's add that to the queue, and let's add the current configuration as scene 2, for example, and now it's got more than one scene in the queue. We can click render, and it will render both of these one after the other. So we're going to get our first shot here where I'm building the street and we're going through it, and then it's going to render the next set of shots which is moving around the roof of that house, and it's going to do those in sequence, so you don't have to worry about going back into the program, setting up more keyframes, rendering that, and just rinsing and repeating that process. You can do it all in one go, which really does save time if you use it effectively. And as it comes to the end of the rendering process, instead of giving you the message asking you if you want to open the folder or return to the program, it will just roll on straight into rendering the next video, and it will give you those options at the end of the rendering process when it's done with all of the jobs that are in the queue. One other thing that it's kind of worth looking at here, but I have never actually tried myself, is changing the rendering method here to either equirectangular rendering or ODS rendering, and that enables the option to have a spherical field of view. So a field of view that you could look around in VR or using a mobile device, and it could be one of those 360-degree videos where you can actually see what's going on around you and explore the scene. Now, I've never done this myself, and I've not really had that much experience with creating that kind of thing. I presume it still follows the camera path that you're taking when you are setting up keyframes and stuff and position keyframes in the replay mod, so it would still have you moving as though you're on rails, but you might be able to tilt your camera around and look around you. It'd be really interesting to try that out. So if the thing you're rendering is a bit more like a dramatic scene or something like that, you could potentially use that to create an experience that viewers can explore a little bit using their VR headset or their mobile device. Might be fun to give it a try. Personally, like I said, I've never done it, so that's really up to you. Explore your creativity. But I think that covers just about everything that I wanted to explain about the replay mod this week. I want to thank you guys for tuning into these tutorials, and please do let me know in the comments if you have any further questions about how I use the replay mod, because it would be cool to make more videos like this in future if people still have information that they want to get. And at the time of this video going out, I am still on holiday, so I'm probably not going to be able to respond to your comments right away, but please do let me know and I'll see if I can tackle a couple of them in future. But for now, that's going to be it for this episode of our replay mod tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.